now we're focusing on modern art. I don't know what it says when somebody says they're going to give a lecture on modern art, the century of art, and what we start or stop. At any rate, I'm going to be trying moving quickly through some artists and stopping with some others. Come join us. Modern art begins most dramatically in the 20th century with Picasso's introduction of Cubism. As the century sought to shape a new creative edge to its art. I'm going to get rid of some things to do. At the same time, modern art, in defining itself, swept back into the 19th century. French artists such as Manet and Monet and fellow Impressionists, Cézanne and Vincent van Gogh and fellow post-Impressionists, down to Matisse and his fellow Fauvists, and many of whom were already at home laying the foundation for the new era. In the first third of the century, modern art's capital was Paris, and its art was nurtured by Europe and North America and certain world cities, but nowhere so profoundly as in Paris. Picasso came from Spain to Paris. Chagall traveled from St. Petersburg, Berlin to Paris. Americans streamed to Paris between the wars in all of the arts. French was the second language for the practice of the arts. But by the beginning of World War II, artists fled the fascism of Germany, Italy, and Spain on ships and planes that landed in New York City, with many individual artists and their families spreading across North America, where safety, support, and opportunity were possible as American cities became their new homes. I am from Missouri, and I was very much aware as a child and later that the German expressionist Max Beckmann came to St. Louis. And the St. Louis Art Museum has one of the finest Beckmann collections in the world. And I'm delighted that MIA has 4 Beckmanns. I like Beckmann. And then the 20th century, adding whole movements and styles of art, has reached into the 21st century, offering its diversity of artists, many more women artists, and artists of color and gay artists, all dancing with their palettes in a wonderful collage of styles, from conceptualist to neo-expressionist to neo-expressionist to neo-romantic, and more neos to guide the 21st century. Minneapolis is home to a lot of neos. All of the artists who I have noted with a light brush, or that I will notice, with a light brush or a heavy one, with simply a moment of acknowledgement or a lingering for some commentary, are artists who offer us the religious element or the spiritual dimension of art in their work. That is the fundamental interest that I have. I'm suggesting that the terms religious and spiritual are synonymous insofar as they're talking about a depth of meaning that relates to ultimate reality, to God, to the holy, to spirit or to truth, as moral or metaphysical, or what was important for many artists, theosophy. Now, if you prefer to use not the theological language of depth, a depth of meaning, but you like the theological language of height rather than depth, then you can talk about the transcendent, which we speak of as being above, yet present to us as God or spirit or truth, and the artworks in some way in their moment of height, if you will, somehow bring us insight into that reality. I once tried to explain to Yale, who was my wife, when we were lying at the beach, can see in them the faces of Tillich and Niebuhr, or Jesus and Moses. And then I gave the punchline question. I said, can you see them? For which the answer should have been yes. But she said, all I see are the chickies and the duckies, and wait a minute, look, there's a goose. Spouses can deflate truth with such offhandedness. Now let me return to matters of import. The use of both of these terms, the religious dimension and the spiritual dimension, is meant to be inclusive, or it includes those who claim no relationship to a religious organization, a church, but claim to have a spirituality. And so we have both concepts. Now I want to note something Paul Tillich said about how we might talk about religious art. And if I had a blackboard, I would do one, but let me simply say what he would say. He's saying that there can be artwork that has religious subject matter. That is, it deals with religious symbols out of some religion. And it can be artwork that has religious and spiritual meaning. Secondly, artwork might be non-religious in subject matter, but it will be religious or spiritual in meaning. Some would say Monet is that. Secondly, thirdly, an artwork can have religious subject matter, but does not necessarily have spiritual meaning. For example, religious trinkets. Or an artwork that has non-religious subject matter and is non-spiritual might well be some of the flowers on our walls. And what he was really trying to get to is that religious or spiritual art can be both art that comes out of a religious tradition and has its own symbols, or it can be art that does not use those symbols, but is still religious and spiritual, and we'll play with that as we look at some artists. I want to comment on, before we get to the artists, on discerning spiritual meaning in a work. I think we must be aware of what the artist presupposes, insofar as we can know about his or her own spiritual perspective. Is he or she a painter who's engaged in or draws on symbols of Christianity, or Judaism, or other major religion, or draws on a theosophical stance as a member of the Theosophy Society, which a great number of artists were members in the 19th and the 20th century. There also can be artists who point to metaphysical stances, or they point to mysticism. So the question can well be, what about the artist? Is he bringing his own religiosity or his own spirituality that we can know about, as well as find in his artwork? And I think we need to be aware of our own religious and spiritual assumptions and how that affects how we approach a work. This business of approaching a work, let me tell another brief story. When our granddaughter Jessica was 4, I thought it was time to take her to the MIA. I went to the MIA and I prepared for this. There is a gallery which has a Degas and a small girl in it. It's a marvelous painting. And that would be the supreme moment as we looked at a few things. I got her to the gallery, and you know what's going to happen. She sees this impressionist piece with ruffled water and 3 boats and a bright sky and flapping flaps for the boats. And I said, well, she stopped there. What do you see? Oh, she said, the water. And she talks about the boats, and she's small and she's looking up. And I said, but will you come see the Degas? And I took her over. showed her that they got it, and she looked at it very seriously. And then she came back over to me and she said, I think that girl is bossy. That was the end of that. What I want to say is that there's a lesson. Don't think that showing a picture that you think is top drawer is top drawer for the one you're showing it to, which is a caution for the words I'm going to show you. It also says that when we go into the gallery, the centerpiece in the middle of the wall may not be what pulls us in and makes us stop. It may be as we walk around that painting. Take that very seriously and stop and ask why. A dialogue begins when the work calls us to stop and look more carefully, and then talk with the art about what we see, and then move from there to discussion regarding its shapes and colors, its formal elements and its style. Now, let us tend to spiritual implications. I want to begin with a 19th century work that was very important in the 20th century as well, and is still very present in the 21st century. If you go to the Museum of Modern Art on a Sunday morning, as I did one time, the galleries are pretty full, but you get to the gallery that has this triptych, and remember it's a triptych, and when a painter uses a triptych, he or she is using a religious form. This is not the way it is now, but they did have it so you could sit, and when we went into that gallery, the people were sitting back here along the wall in benches that are provided. It was very quiet. It was like a church. I would say what was happening was a kind of meditation. Monet's water lilies were touching people in a special way. Now this becomes interesting theologically, because a lot of theologians say Impressionism only deals with the surface. It's really about the physics of water and light on water and the moment of time in the day. And that, of course, is true, except the word it is only. Yeah. Because if it is this for my students, then I have to take it seriously. And so, in spite of the theologians, somehow this work becomes a work that engages people around a spiritual dimension of their lives. There's another 19th century painter who has enormous influence on the 20th century, and that's Vincent van Gogh. What is often more intriguing of Van Gogh is that he began his adult life as a Dutch Reformed minister. There was concern about ordaining, but they did. But then they sent him to a parish which was a peasant parish. It was filled with peasant people. They were mainly weavers. This was the loom, and this is where they worked. What happens to him is that he over-identifies with the peasants. He becomes like them. Therefore, he couldn't minister to them. And he reaches a period of almost mental breakdown. And they remove him from the ministry. I tell the story because deep in Van Gogh, and where you find it is not only in the art but in his letters to his brother Theo, you find a deeply religious man. He struggles with God. And then God is finally settled for him. And back and forth, back and forth. He had to leave this part of the world, but this was a woman who came to live with him, not as a lover, but as someone who needed a place to stay. And he entitled it Sorrow. Van Gogh's interests were very much focused on what happens to the emotional life. And the emotional life is a route into the life of depth and the life of spirituality. So, what he also wanted was community. And in Arles, he found that. And I give a picture here, not to study, but to simply note. which said that the emotions could come and not be controlled. There was a poll taken, and Starry Night is the best loved painting in America. Now, I don't know how one might press that, but why not? Here we have the painting, and it is for Van Gogh very much a religious piece, for there is the cosmos, there is the heavens, if you will, and there is the community below, and there is the church with its steeple. And so he played with it, and he plays with us as we watch it. With our children, when they were very small, they loved this painting when they didn't even look at other paintings. Why? Because there's an energy that comes from the sky. There's an energy about nature, and nature is a route into the spiritual dimension of art. Now, let me return. I took Stiles to the museum, the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, and this is one of his wheat fields, which we all know, as well as the fig trees that we have in MIA. But Stiles comes at 5, and he looks at this work, and he looks at this work, and he says, "That is too wild." And he says, "That is too quiet." Well, it's not wild or quiet to us, but for a 5-year-old mind, these were the boundaries. And the dilemma that Van Gogh faced with the boundaries, because he pressed them and he pressed over, and that's when he was in trouble. This is the piece I love most, and it is called First Steps. And it's when he has, again, a part of his community that he can do the painting of. Well, now, the chair, which many of us know, which was his way of symbolizing a kind of happiness in this case, because he thought the artists were coming to be with him. This is the armchair, and this is the wheat field. Now, like a lot of artists through history, the round, yellow, gold globe is a symbol of God. And it was a symbol of God, and he writes about this in his letters for Van Gogh. And we see it as sunrise over the wheat and over the field that the young fellow is working in. And this is Cezanne, and I put it in because we have it at the MIA. I once took a friend who's a philosopher there, and he looked at this work and he says, it's about the treeness of the trees. Treeness is a metaphysical concept, and there is something within that is essential to what otherwise the reality poses for us. And of course, Matisse was a part of this 19th century moving into the 20th century. And it seems to me here, it's a work which a lot of works will focus on, of unity. He achieves the unity and achieves the dance, and he achieves it in the nude. There are no clothes. There is no cultural reality that we need to deal with. There's simply the reality of the people showing us the essence of unity through the dance. Now we come to Picasso. Picasso had a blue period, and this is part of it. This is called wonderfully Le Gourmet. This is not wonderful. The crouching woman. It's one of the sad images, and Picasso again and again in his work will come back to the reality of sadness. This is in what was called his rose period. And this is the work that I lived with lots of years. walk through it. The mother, sometimes it's said that she's holding a child, but that's just a suggestion. Her arms are folded in. The man's arms are folded in, which says, I'm drawing within myself. I'm not moving out to whatever is there. But the tragedy lies in the adults, whether there is a child, their child perhaps, or not. But the boy touches his father, and with his other hand, he is reaching towards the mother. So he becomes the one, whatever the tragedy was, who reaches out to respond to it. I think it's an extraordinarily powerful work, and it's a beautiful religious work. European artists, particularly filmmakers, Fellini, set motion pictures again and again on the sea. And this is set on the sea, and it's in garb that has no cultural identity, so that these are universal figures. And this is the work that shook the art community. La Demoiselle Avignon. The Cubist elements are here. This was his introduction of his Cubism. And they were meant to reshape in order to have you rethink the subjects and objects in the work. Thus, objects with Cubism are given 3 dimensions rather than just 2. And some works float in the air, while the violin and the water bottle seem to interact, and natural subjects were reconceived in cubistic form. What does La Demoiselle Avignon say to us? There are, if you will notice, 5 nude women, and they are in the style of Cubism. You see the sharp edges, you see the triangles, the squares. You see the blue curtains or garments behind them. Now, you also see that there are 2 on our right who have masks. Now, masks are very important in the art world of this time. They're coming in from Africa, and indeed, Freud had a mask which sat on his mantle in his home, an African mask. These are not simply African masks put up as an African mask. These are his renditions, his recreation of the mask. But what he's doing is giving to 2 of his prostitutes masks. And so who are they behind the mask? And I think in a way, that's what he's saying. Well, the other 3 have no mask, but they have a certain deliberateness in their eyes, which look out, but they do not look at you. And the mouths, which are simply one line, have a determinedness, an over-againstness, and perhaps a sadness. So now it seems to me he is moving into his prostitutes. In the original version of the painting, he put a sailor who had come for a prostitute, and he put a boy who was holding a skull. The price of sex. Insofar as at that time the disease was so crucial. He took those out of the painting because he didn't want an allegory working about sex with prostitutes, and he simply left us with the prostitutes. And they're different every time I go back, I think, but they are there masked and not masked. But the not masked ones do not look at us. They look through us, beyond us, but not with us. And Yale was teaching, she taught at the university there. And so I had the day to go, and I was going to Western Kirk. Western Kirk is the church where the Rembrandts are buried. And so I am walking, and I hadn't realized until I looked at my map that I was going through the sexual order of Amsterdam. As you know, it's legitimate, and that helps control disease, also helps deal with prostitutes in terms of whether they stay in the profession or they leave it. And so, but there I was, and there sat four nudes in the window. There was a group of people, and there was one man who had more obvious intents, and then others walked by, and then I was standing there. And I was looking at a particular woman who was looking back at me. And it's very interesting how that look can still haunt me. Because it was the face of, yes, I'm here, but no. There was enormous sadness on the face. And what I should have done was given her the money and walked away, but I just walked away. Well, we had strange little moments like that in our lives. I walked on the Western Kirk. This is a work which I think is one of his greatest works, and it's The Three Dancers, but it has a story behind it. He had an artist friend named Casamegas, and the art friend committed suicide. He committed suicide because the woman who he lived with simply moved into other relationships so easily rather than staying with him. And finally, he could not handle it when, in fact, she married an artist. Now, who are our people? The woman is over on the left. That is Germaine. There is a little story that I remember about Picasso. Picasso, much later, in the 1940s, I think, went with a friend to visit this older woman, and she did not know who they were going to visit. But they went to visit an old woman who was really at the end of life and had very few items to welcome her life into some kind of happiness. And he talked with her. Her name was Germaine. And he left money, and they left. He painted this painting after that visit. We have on our right over there the man that Germaine married, in spite of Carlos, who is the one in the middle. And what we have with the woman, if we can simply look at certain parts that are there, we have two faces. One face is over here on the far left, and it's sometimes been said that's the demonic face. That may be heavy. Then he has another face, which is, you see the eye, the eye that's in a circle, that's in a square of sorts, right above the blue. That's the second face. And that face is subdued. That face is quiet. And so those are the two faces that Picasso gave Germaine. She is dancing, they're all three dancing. But you see Germaine's arm, I wish I had a light, but I don't. Germaine's arm, it reaches out to the white hand of Riblo, I believe is the name of the artist, and her husband. And as you can see behind him is an open door out onto the deck. Let us dance. But the middle one is Carlos Casamegas, and he is the crucified one, with his hands up on the beam, and his head turned so that you have to turn this way to see it. So it was Yale and I got married, I went to the MoMA, and they had a new book of MoMA's collections, and on the front cover were the three musicians. And so I took it at the wedding, I gave it to her as a gift. She delighted in it. I fear some who came did not quite understand why that would be a wedding gift, but it was. And so I'm just showing you something out of my history, I guess. The three musicians, but you have a very good sense of what Cubism does. It keeps the figure. It's not abstract art, but it reconfigures the figures. This is perhaps one of the greatest works of art of the 20th century, and we talked about that a couple weeks ago, and it's one you know, it's Guernica, the bombing of the city. He paints this afterwards. He's brought to MoMA in New York, and the understanding is not until Spain has a democracy will the painting be returned. And indeed, there came a point when they had a democratic government, and it was returned to the museum in Madrid. This is a crucifixion. Briefly, you have the central figure, which would be Christ, not that head. That is a symbol of a strange insect that carries disease. This is the head, and these are the hands. Here's the hand with the blood through it, here's the blood. Here you have, out of the Matthew Gospel, the figure who has come with the sword to move it into the body of Christ. And he sits on his own horse, and there is a shield in his other hand. And over here we have the people who have come to view the crucifixion, not the ones we know, but the ones who would have been attracted to it. And down here we have the throwing of the dice to see who will win. Here you have the ladder that goes up to the cross. He also drew a lot of crosses that he kept doing until he died. Picasso grew up in the Catholic Church. He was an altar boy. And he knew well the liturgical life of the Catholic Church. He left, and he would re-enter this religious world of his by re-entering it with religious symbols. And I think we need to take them seriously when we see them, because they're pointing to a religious meaning that those symbols carry. Here, I put this in because this is called a standing female nude. This is where abstract work becomes a little abstract. Now, Colgan's, Kathy Colgan's. This is a portrait of hers. Kathy Colgan's was born into a family which had created a church. It was a humanist Christian church. It was created by the grandfather, Rupp. Rupp had been a legislator, was a lawyer, and was an activist. And this was in the reign of the Prussian head of the state. He was a strong, absolute Calvinist, and he had no use for a new church that focused on the Gospel of Matthew and focused on such values as freedom and love, justice, and action. So Kolbitz grew up in this church and was deeply related to her grandfather. Now, I want to move very quickly through her life by simply saying Kolbitz decides to leave, and this is the second period of her life in which she renounces Christianity. The religion I have is the true religion of socialism. And she was very high in the socialist world, and she now becomes a painter in this process. And so this is the period of her socialism and many of the paintings she did. I want to give you one example You see here the mother weeping over the dead child. And you see over in the left side the father. And it's a broken face. And you see the child with his hands up as if uncertain. And there they are in their home, which houses the Weavings. And there's the death. So the Weavers began to unite and talk about having a revolt. So this is the second image. And we see them all gathered. And now they are gathered in where they are planning the revolt. And now they march off. And notice both men and women march off. And they are marching where? They're marching to the gate of the one who owns the mills. What had happened was Germany had a great industry of weaving, but the British took it over in a way that greatly hurt the German market. And so down went the wages and up went poverty. So here they are at the home. And if you go through the particulars, you can see here the woman picking up a brick to throw in. But here is the ending of the series. And here we see the broken and dead bodies of the Weavers being brought in through where the Weavers do their work. Well, it was a series, and it got a lot of attention. She was invited into the Academy of the German Academy of Art, and she slowly became, during this period, an internationalized, an international recognized artist. She goes into a third period, and in that third period, she begins to come back to the religious life and had been there with her grandfather, Rupp, who created the church, and her father, who was a socialist, but also a part of the church. Rupp's God was an austere God, a God who had given certain laws that we should embody, and we should follow, and the kingdom would be built. It was not complex, but it was very difficult to follow. She begins to recapture some of Rupp's theology around the Gospel of Matthew. And then she also begins to reach out in different ways to religious communities and religious moments and events. One of the things that's beneath this drive to look again at the religious life is the death of her son. Now, I tell a story about Peter, the son. She does not want him to go to war, but he insists. He's 18, he's going to fight. Now remember, we're in the household of a German family, and so he's allowed to go. And in a matter of 6 months, he lies dead on the battlefield in Brussels. I have a copy of a print we'll see in a moment called Battlefield that's downstairs that we might look at. So out of the death, she re-examines her religious life and begins to think, as she said, as Grandfather Rupp did, but yet that's not really who I am. But she begins to return. Now she returns to a religious life, but underneath there are all the questions. She writes to Hans, her son, but on the cross, what are the last words in Matthew? Why hast thou forsaken me? That is the line I come back to, because that so the rumblings beneath the recovery of a part of her religious past takes place. Now, we move finally into the last chapter, where her religion has become more significant, and she's dealing with the question of death. At least that's the one I want to pull out. Basically, death was seen as the enemy, so she draws a cartoon. I don't know what the Japanese cartoon artists think of it, but it's pretty powerful. Sweeping down to seize the children. But she says we can't leave death simply as the enemy. And so she begins to explore different ways of looking at it. Death is recognized as a friend because the agony is so great. And death comes, and death takes me as a friend. She looks at the young girl in the lap of death, the young girl who is relinquishing herself. Now remember, the class of people she's dealing with are the people who suffer greatest. And here is extraordinary work. The woman is entrusting herself to death, but the children, one child moves back into the body of the mother, and the other child looks out with fear at the face of death. So it's an amazing work in many respects. The mother is ready, but the children are used to death. Here is death on the road, and here is death by drowning, the family. Now this is important work for Coleman's because it had to do with the sending of your children to the war. And seed for sowing should not be milled. The word milled is incorrect. It should be the seed for sowing should not be ground. Yes. And she came back into the political arena and she attacked often other artists who were saying, send now the boys and the old men to the war effort. So here again she was with another war. And her nephew will go to war, her grandson will go to war, and he will die. But in this war, there is a dilemma. She's invited to come by virtue of the State Department of the United States. But she says, I must not do that for two reasons. One is what will happen to my family, and secondly, what will it say to my other artist friends? And so she stays, and the Nazis come. She goes to the funeral of an artist, and I should remember his name, but I don't. He hadn't worked at the MIA, but he was dying, and no one should come, and yet she went, and the Nazis reprimanded her very strongly. But the Nazis had a problem. An internationally recognized artist they couldn't afford to eliminate. And so, seed for sowing should not be ground. This is battlefield. The old woman, see the hand? The hand. And the hand is holding up the face in order to see. To see if it's Peter, the old woman on the battlefield. And you can't see it in this, but there are stretched around on the field. And then this is the most powerful work for me. For it is called the call of death. And you see, the hand of death comes down. It's not unfriendly. It's not mean. It's not cruel. It's not grabbing her. It's just coming down to touch her. Now, what is her stance? Well, she is willing to look at death, but her body says, understands, and she does look at death. She did this work a matter of days before she died. And so that's something of Kathy Kovacs. I've written an essay about Kovacs' death, and I'm now trying to do an essay that deals more broadly with her life. We'll see how that goes. But now, let us move on. And I'm going to move on quickly. Rouault is one who uses religious subject matter and has, I think, spiritual religious meaning. And I choose only two pieces. His image of Christ, here's the Christ figure, and here is above this is the red crown. His Jesus was often the more meditative figure. When we get here, we see Jesus crucified on the cross. And I think it's a powerful piece in part because Rouault was willing to take the risk of trying to show what a death on a cross by crucifixion would actually do to the person. Here is a work. It's very similar to the one we have at the MIA, and it's quieter. It's quieter, meditative. That one at the MIA is powerful. Now, quickly, another artist, Chagall. We are moving towards World War II, and Chagall is what? Chagall is Jewish, but Chagall does glass windows for Protestant churches in England. Chagall uses crosses, and he uses lots of Jesus thrown into his work. It's this marvelous eclectic mess that he has. It's wonderful. But this is not wonderful, this is powerful. For what we have is the war starting. Now, I want to point to the parts of it, if I may. This used to say, I am a Jew, and he took the words off. But it is the notion of the Jew being taken away to the death camps. This is the wandering Jew who has the Torah. Up here is Kristallnacht, the burning of the synagogues. And you see down on the ground, you see you see the churches, you see hymnals, you see the lights of the candles, and you see what holds the tablet. And now we have what's called the wandering Jew. That's a myth about the wandering Jew in Europe. Here we have the lights, and here is the woman fleeing with the child. We have the lights, and it goes up, and who is this Jesus? Jesus is wearing a Jewish prayer shawl. And if we go on up, if you can read that, it's Jesus, King of the Jews. And then what we have up here are the elders. And he had the audacity to include a woman among the others. Over here we have the war going on and the destruction of the village and the communities. So what he did was take Christian Europe and take Nazism and take the Jewish problem, and he places in the midst of it a cross. Where will you find me? He also did the windows in Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem, and we just give you an idea of them. And then Emil Nolde was a German expressionist, and I think this is a powerful piece using Christ figure and then the children. Jesus was Christ with the children, and we don't see his face except in the eyes of the children. And now I'm going to round this out quickly. Oh my, how can I say quickly? This is the studio of Barbara And we're in St. Ives. This has been moved to Winchester Cathedral, but it was there when we were there, and it's looking out over the Irish Sea. And remember, we talked a bit about the cross, that Van Gogh's golden disc. God is the centerpiece of the cross, and it's a God who has power and presence. And in spite of all that's happened, God is still there. And she did 3 others, and of course we have one. We ought to go out and trip up there to the Arboretum, which has in its sculpture garden 3 heifers and 1 is a cross. I want to do these. Heifer said, I do single figure standing that shows strength and power, meaning of the human. Now, a note on this, she's a member of the Church of England, and she is a practicing member. The cross came out of the crisis of losing her son. But she said the single cross, the single standing figure, what she wanted to do was give an ideal vision of the human community. And so this is the ideal of what we would be like. And here are the 2 forms, the dividing circle. And you walk around them and they change. This is the beauty about it. She was indebted to her older friend, almost like a brother, Henry Moore. And this is in the sculpture garden. And this is really a sculpture of 2 people dancing. And you can see them dancing and swirling. And here are the 2 people again. And thirdly, she said, we have the individual standing. We have 2 people. We have people in community with one another. And then we have the person and their inner lives. And she often we show that by the use of wires. And what we can't see is the other side of this, which has a concave section so that there's an interaction on the 2 sides. And here is the piece, and a long time ago I was in Rochester and I drove down the river and there was a heaven. I don't know if it's still there or not. But these were 4 squares, and you could walk through it. But what she was trying to get at again was the strength of the human community. And then Cindy Beth, who put all of this together, Cindy Beth found 2 forms with white. And these forms, again, point out the 2. They're almost humorous. And that's all. I want to thank particularly Cindy Beth in the middle of the week. Later in the week, I asked Thor that Hennepin have a silent drink. 20th century technology, 20th century luxury. And Thor, I heard laughter in the background. Some time, and Thor said, let me work on this post. Well, then Thor contacted Cindy Beth. Cindy Beth is a person of action, deliverance. Things happen, has to be this Thor. And so I got a phone call, and you pay attention to her phone call. She said, you're not going in there with slackers. And I said, what? And so she sat there and dragged ones, and we found ones we could, and there we had at least a few for you today. And so that's the end of this presentation. It's not the 20th century, it's a selection of a few artists who, if you lived with, if you saw and observed for a while, you would find they have a religious power that comes to you and affects you as well. So, now, thank you. I wonder if there are any questions. We've got 5 minutes for questions, maybe. If there are any questions. giving a universality. You don't put clothes in your coat to identify. You don't put them beside the Georgian building. You don't put shoes to identify. They're barefoot and dressed that is sort of nondescript, like the sea is there in a form that can't be owned by a particular culture. Yes?
Wilson, would you comment about the show just across the street, the Keith Haring show?
Oh, yeah. The Keith Haring show is over there, and I must say, I went not expecting a great deal, as did I think Tom Tyler when we first got there, and we found it actually a rather moving, traced